This is the third and final part of my Ford Ranger PHEV launch review, and in it we're going to cover off-road and some buying advice. Previously I've gone over what a hybrid is, weights, range, packaging, on-road, towing and a Pro Power on board in parts 1 and 2. So let's look at what the PHEV Ranger has in terms of off-road features. Well, it's got what is pretty common, Ford's four-wheel drive system. In this case, it's got the 4A all-wheel drive option, but it's got low range and the ability to, in effect, lock it sensitive, albeit a clutch in high range. It's got a rear cross-axle differential lock, which is active in every single drive mode from two-wheel drive all the way down to low range. It's got recovery points front and rear, 800mm wading depth, same as any other Ranger. Now let's talk about the differences to the diesel, because that's really what I want to focus in on. First of all, the EV Now mode only works in 4H. It does not work in 4L. We're going to come on to that in a moment, and therefore there's no regen in 4L either. The weight distribution, as I've covered in part 1, is it's actually perfect for the vehicle being unloaded, because there's quite a bit of weight over the back, gives it roughly equal weight distribution. But once you start to get it loaded up, you're going to be biasing a lot of weight towards the rear, which is not going to be ideal for off-roading. It's not going to, I don't think it's really going to stop it going anywhere. It's just not ideal. Now it's also got a petrol engine, not a diesel. You're not quite going to get the retardation engine braking which you do off the diesels, but it's good enough from what the testing I was able to do. It's got a good hill descent control to back it up, although please do not use hill descent control in lieu of low range gearing. And there's no rock mode, as there isn't on some ranges, but there's mud ruts, and to be honest I don't think you really need rock mode anyway. Alright, so how does it actually perform with all of that? Well, essentially the same as any other Ranger is the short answer. It's the interesting thing here is that 4H EV mode is better on flattish ground than 4 low. With the exception for things like hills. That's where you've really got to use your low range. So I've got some clips here to demonstrate that point. Now, first off, an apology. This is not exactly the footage that I should have collected, but I'm going to drive this car up a hill in EV mode and then in ICE mode and talk about the differences. Now this is in 4L Auto EV, so that's ICE and EV motor working in concert. Now this footage was recorded without sound, so there's nothing to hear, unfortunately, but what you can see is slightly the difference between ICE and EV. Now from the driver's seat, I can tell you that I felt I had better control over the vehicle in 4H with EV mode than in Auto EV with ICE mode in low range. It just felt like the traction control is that little bit better, and I would prefer to drive around in EV mode because I just think it's better control, it's quieter, fewer emissions, it's just generally good. Now, something else I want to stress, do not use 4A for off-road work. I know Ford had us driving around up steep hills in 4A. That should have been 4H. 4A is what you use when you've got a risk of transmission wind-ups, such as on bitumen, wet bitumen, that sort of stuff. You can even use it on dirt roads. Once you're into anything worthy of the name off-road, 4H or 4L is what you want to use. And see my other video for more details on that. Now, the vehicle is heavier. It's maybe 200-300 kilograms heavier than the standard diesel ranges. That's not really a disadvantage. When it comes to additional weight off-road, a heavier vehicle doesn't perform as well as a light vehicle, but there's very, very little in it. So do not think that the heavier EV will necessarily perform worse than the diesel. And in fact, in some battery electric vehicles, because they've got the weight down low and central, they've got a lower centre of gravity, they can perform better than a lighter vehicle because of the location of the centre of gravity, as opposed to it being a disadvantage. Now, with the Ranger PHEV, we've got the weight at the back fairly high up, so it doesn't have that advantage that a hybrid, a series hybrid or pure battery electric vehicle would have in terms of weight distribution. But that said, again, you're not going to drive a diesel Ranger anywhere a reasonably skilled driver couldn't follow in a PHEV. So really just as capable. Degrees. Now for these clips, unfortunately there's no sound, and by the way, 60% gradient should be accessible by pretty much any four-wheel drive with low range. What is really the test here is electric mode only, and that red car is me driving up as slowly as I can possibly go, just to see what sort of throttle response and how much was left in the tank, so to speak, coming up the hill in 4HEV mode, and there was plenty of torque and power available. So quite a good demonstration as to the vehicle's climbing ability in electric only mode. Okay, now here's the gradient which we got to drive up at the proving grounds, and that's what it looks like, 31 degrees, 60%. The two are different ways of measuring a gradient. So you can see that that's pretty steep, and that's probably as steep as you'll ever find in the Victorian high country or something like that. The difference being this is all perfectly flat and smooth, whereas in the high country and chopped up tracks it isn't, and you've got much less traction, so fairly steep. Now if you're wondering how steep a four-wheel drive can generally climb, usually it's about 45 degrees, and that's when the tyres physically run out of grip. It's not a torque thing, it's certainly not a power thing, it's not a torque limitation, because in low range you can get enough torque to the wheels. So at this point, unless you've got special tyres, you literally tend to run out of traction. Now a couple of other points here. Parallel hybrids like the Ranger drive all four wheels in concert once you've got the front and rear axles locked, so whatever power and torque they've got, it can go, that one motor can deliver it to all four wheels. Now your series hybrids like the Shark have a motor at the front, motor at the rear. When you're going up a really steep hill, it doesn't matter how much torque that motor on the front has got, it can't send any to the rear wheels, which is why for a series hybrid design you've got to have a much bigger motor on the rear than you would otherwise normally have it if it was a road going vehicle, because on steep hills the back does the bulk of the work. And low range gearing offers huge multiplication. You can't just look at the sort of output figure of an electric vehicle and go, okay, that's how much torque it is. What's really important for low range work, off-road work, is torque at the wheels, not how much torque the engine produces. And it's torque at the wheels that you go through all of that gearing and reduction ratios, and that's the numbers you've got to play with, not the headline figures. And the other key point here is that modern vehicles have hardware capabilities, and those hardware capabilities are often pulled back by software. So the vehicle may be capable of delivering a certain amount of torque, but it might be pulled back, and most vehicles will torque limit in lower gears to protect the drivetrain, so only get the full torque in higher gears. Anyway, the whole PHEV EV off-road thing is very, very complex. I've done a number of videos on this, but that just gives you an overview of the complexities we have to understand if you need to get the best from these vehicles. Now let's talk about EV mode in low range, because the Ranger can't do it. So what's it got? It's got a 75 kilowatt electric motor and 300 Newton meters, and in low range that's plenty. It's not plenty if you're going to be towing up a steep hill, in fact towing anything, but in low range it is absolutely fine. And I only need to think back to my Land Rover Defender TD5, which had 90 kilowatts of power, 300 newton meters, and a 5-speed gearbox, no torque converter or anything, and that was a complete weapon in low range. So the motor has the ability to do the job. There's no question about that. And the battery will last a long time. And again, for this, I just need to look at my own experience driving a Range Rover Sport off-road, which had low range and was able to drive in electric only, and also my radio controlled rock crawlers, because with those RC cars the battery lasts forever when I'm doing stop start rock crawly stuff, low speed terrain. But if I get it up to speed and start zooming it around, the battery depletes very, very quickly. So I think that would be a huge advantage. And control. The electric response is so much better than the petrol or diesel response, which is not surprising. I've said before, when you push your accelerator down on a petrol or diesel car, you send a message to the engine control unit that brings in more air, more fuel, combusts, that pushes the cylinder down, more torque is produced. All of that takes a finite amount of time, whereas the electric, it's instantaneous, so it's actually better. So why no low range in EV? I asked Ford, and we have an answer. So low range is a very specific off-road mode where maximum control is required at all times. I completely agree with that. And related to that, regen is not used in low range. The system has not been designed to ensure maximum control by using low range, etc., etc. So yeah, make of that what you will. So that's why Ford haven't done it. I disagree with that. I think low range in electric mode is absolutely fantastic, and it should be implemented for the reasons following. One, it saves fuel. Electric vehicles are really good at stop-start and slow speed work. Once you get into higher speed, cruising at 100 k's an hour, that's when the diesel start to come into their own, because the torque converter can locked out, they're running in the sweet spot, etc. But stop-start stuff, I mean, that is the sweet spot for EVs, absolutely. It's safer and it's quieter. You really need to drive an electric vehicle off-road to understand this point here, but it is so much better not to have the engine noise, and you can also hear the tyres work, which is a point on racetracks as well, and that gives you, as a driver, important feedback. It's just a better drive, fewer emissions, and who would not want that? And it's more effective off-road, better brake traction control for the reasons I've talked about there. It's quicker reacting, and you as a driver can hear what's going on. And then you get regen on long down hills. If you're going down Billy Goat Bluff or Blue Rag or whatever, you know, there's hills in the Victorian High Country which go on for 5 to 7 kilometres. Why would you not want to charge your battery using all of that free power? It just seems such a shame to dissipate it out to the atmosphere as heat and brake pad wear and disc rotor wear. It's just such a shame. And Land Rover did it for the Range Rover Sport. I've done that. I've taken that car off-road. I've towed with it off-road. It works. I just do not understand Ford's logic with this, and I think that it's a massive thing that they're missing here, not to have this, because it could be really quite a good competitive point compared to a lot of their PHEV competitors. We are now driving in electric only mode, and as a result all of the woodland animals are smiling at us as we go by, emitting no emissions whatsoever. Well, that's the car. I can't speak for what emissions Dean is emitting.
Well, they can't hear us coming.
But they can't hear us coming, so yeah. This is electric only off-roading. Now let's talk a little bit about the EV powertrain, and this gets a bit technical, so only watch this bit if you're really into EV powertrain background. If you're just looking at the car generally, I've covered the other parts already. So here's what we've got. So we've got the ICE engine, which is a 2.3 litre engine. That then has an electric motor connected to the same drive shaft, and that motor, we are told, sits between the engine and the transmission. So I'm taking the transmission as a generic term for anything sort of south of the engine. We've then got a torque converter over here, and then we've got the 10-speed gearbox. We've got a transfer case over here which sends power to the back wheels and to the front wheels, and then there's a clutch which connects or disconnects to drive the front wheels, and that can be locked out in 4H mode. That clutch connects and disconnects in 4A mode only, so you don't get transmission wind up. Now that might not be precisely how it's laid out, but I think conceptually that is pretty close to the mark. Now, here is the conclusions we need to draw from this. The EV motor is between the ICE and transmission, so it does use the torque converter. Now, this is different to battery electric vehicles which don't have gearboxes, they don't have torque converters, they direct drive. Typically there's a reduction gear and straight to the diff, so you've in effect got two reduction gears. So that's a bit different, and again, it's not better, not worse, just different. Now, the thing about torque converters is that they can multiply torque, typically up to about 2. So if you've got 300 newton meters coming in, you might get 500 or 600 newton meters going out. So it's like a set of gears, which is pretty cool. And remember that electric motors get the maximum torque from 0 RPM. You don't need to spin the vehicle up to 1500, 2000 to get maximum torque. Electric motor, it's just straight there. Now, so here's the pro. The torque converter can act as a torque multiplier. So in effect, you kind of get a low range even in 4H, even though you don't have one. Now, that's not ideal, of course, and that brings us on to the con, because using a torque converter as low range isn't ideal because it might overheat the torque converter and you're not going to get engine braking, etc. So it's not great, but it is a pro and a con there to understand. Okay, so let's finish up with some buying advice then. So PHEV versus V6. So remember, they're the same power to weight, the same dimensions, essentially the same capability. You'd buy the PHEV for two reasons. If it's going to be cost effective for you, do enough short range trips to make it worthwhile, and bear in mind those trips probably need to be fewer than 30 kilometers, and you need to be able to wait at least 4 hours, maybe 7 hours between charges. So that is a bit of a limitation, but if that fits what you're doing, then that's good. And remember that you also will save fuel on stop start, even if you're not running on pure EV mode. And secondly, and a big one is going to be, you want that portable power. You want 800-900 amp hours of beautiful power on demand, including generator mode. And I think it's that combination could well see a lot of people tending towards the PHEV. So why the V6? Well, it's cheaper to buy. It's a few $1,000s cheaper to buy. It's got better weight numbers, payload, rear axle load, etc. It's longer range, 80 litres of diesel versus 70 of petrol, and the hybrid's not going to make up for that. It's got more chassis space. You can put service bodies on it. So again, pros and cons there. You can decide which one is best for you. Now let's take a look at the Shark. So what are the advantages of the Range Rover, the Shark? Well, the first one is numbers. It's got much better payload. The axle limits are much better. Shark's got a very low front axle limit. You put pretty much anything in it and you're over. It can tow more, not that I'd necessarily want to tow 3.5 tons, but it can tow more than the Shark. That said, I'm pretty happy with the Shark towing up to 2,500. It's got better off-road capability, I would suggest. The range is going to be longer. Shark is really quite short range there. It's got the Pro Power on board, 6.9 kilowatts. The big disadvantage is it's slower. If you like accelerating, then the Shark's going to be the car for you. The short EV range, no fast charging, etc. So as a hybrid EV mode, the Shark's the absolute clear winner. Now, the Shark is also much cheaper to buy and to run. Double the EV range. It's got more onboard power, though it can't peak as high. Acceleration is great, and it tows up to its 2,500 kilo limit really well. And in fact, the vehicle is heavier than 2,500, so you've always got good control there. All-wheel drive, electric power. It's good, and it's got a bigger battery, but not the total output. Spec for price is also very good. You can't deny that this is an excellent value for money vehicle. So the Ranger wins on off-road, range, payload, towing and Pro Power on board. I think that the way they've done that's probably better than with the Shark. The Shark is better for certainly acceleration, EV range, and cheaper, and it's got a larger battery. So again, neither is better, you just take your pick. Now if we look at the GWM Alpha, which I haven't actually driven, so I've just gone off to spec sheets for this and talked to a few other people. Again, we got a payload advantage here. This does tow 3.5 tons, but honestly with the weight numbers on this, it is not a good look, and I think the Range is going to be a much better vehicle for heavy towing. Yes, it might have the power, but fundamentally if a vehicle is going to run afoul of its weight numbers, it doesn't matter if it's got 10,000 Newton meters of torque and 5,000 kilowatts. The numbers are numbers, right? Pro Power on board, that's an advantage. Again, slow and short EV range, particularly compared to the Chinese competition. Again, this vehicle's cheaper to buy and run. It's not as cheap as the Shark, but it's still definitely cheaper than the Ranger. More than double the EV range, more onboard power. It's got a 75 litre fuel tank, so it's actually got more fuel in this car than the Ranger, so it should be able to go further, in fact quite a bit further, especially because it's actually got a bigger battery. So range wise, the GWN wins. Spec for price, I think it's good value as well. Disadvantage is the spares in the tub. Now that's just awful. I know why, there's just not enough space because of the huge battery, but for me that would be pretty close to a deal breaker because you do not want that being taken up there. The payload is tiny, 685 kilograms. I was hoping to be able to get axle weight limits, can't, but honestly that's kind of a deal breaker for me and probably for many other people, and it's got a bigger battery. So summary for that, again, the Ranger is what you want for payload, better towing numbers, Pro Power on board, EV range, and this has got great off-road capability as well, front and rear lockers. So again, no best there, just kind of choose which one works for you. Okay, now summary then. So the Ranger PHEV can in effect do everything the other Rangers can. There's a couple of things about range and total payload, but essentially it's there or thereabouts. But it is short on range, battery power and charge times compared to the Chinese competition, and that is the headline. You see the thing, it's slow, it can only it probably can't even do 50 Ks electrically. Those are the headlines, that's what everyone is talking about, and it's a fair point, you know, it does fall short. But you've got to look at things like payload, weight figures, and the way Pro Power on board is done, and I haven't done a full investigation to that yet. And once you get behind those big headlines, I think the case for the Ranger PHEV becomes stronger. Whether it's enough for you or to tip the balance, I don't know, but I would encourage you just to look a little bit further behind the headline. I think if you're looking at you should consider a PHEV, and we've not really fully understood the pros and the cons and all the use cases that PHEV utes can be put towards. And I actually like the Ranger in the market. It's taking a different slant compared to the other. I think the three we've got there are quite different to each other, and I think that's good. It gives people good choice out in the marketplace, and I hope that this video has been of some use if you are considering a new ute of this nature.